The footage I'm about to show you will absolutely horrify you. 3 months ago, I discovered that the woman I trusted to care for my 6-month-old son was systematically poisoning him with adult medication to keep him sedated. The hidden cameras I installed throughout my house caught everything, and what you'll see literally saved my child's life and put a dangerous predator behind bars for 12 years. My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. For 8 years, I've worked in the NICU, monitoring the tiniest, most vulnerable patients, watching for every subtle sign of distress, every change in breathing patterns, every indication that something might be wrong. I thought I knew everything about keeping babies safe. I've seen medication overdoses, I've witnessed child abuse cases, I've been trained to recognize the signs that most people miss, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I discovered happening in my own home, to my own baby, by someone I trusted completely with his life. But let me start from the very beginning, because you need to understand exactly how a mother's instinct, combined with my medical training, helped me uncover what could have been the most devastating tragedy of my life. Every detail matters, because the patterns I noticed might save another child's life. It all began in early September 2023 when I had to return to work after my 6-month maternity leave. Leaving Ethan felt impossible. He was this perfect, chunky little baby with the biggest brown eyes and the most infectious laugh. He just started sitting up on his own, grabbing at everything within reach, babbling constantly. The thought of leaving him with a stranger made my stomach turn. But financially, I had no choice. Finding the right nanny felt like an impossible task. I interviewed 12 candidates over 3 weeks. Some seemed too young, others too inexperienced. One woman showed up 30 minutes late and smelled like cigarettes. Another couldn't answer basic questions about infant safety. I was starting to panic, thinking I'd have to quit my job, when Rebecca Martinez responded to my posting on care.com. Rebecca seemed like a godsend. She was 34 years old, had been nannying for 6 years, and came with what appeared to be impeccable references. 3 different families all gave her glowing recommendations. The Johnsons said she was absolutely wonderful with our twin boys. The Garcias wrote that she was trustworthy, reliable, and genuinely loved our daughter. The Hendersons called her a blessing, who treated our son like her own. When she came for the interview, everything about her seemed perfect. She spoke in this soft, gentle voice that immediately put me at ease. She had current certifications in infant CPR and first aid. She asked all the right questions about Ethan's routine, his feeding schedule, his favorite toys. During the trial day, I watched from the kitchen as she interacted with him, and Ethan seemed comfortable with her immediately. He didn't cry when I left the room, which was unusual for him at that stage. I had absolutely no idea what I was inviting into my home. The first few weeks seemed absolutely perfect. Rebecca would arrive at exactly 6:30 a.m., always with a warm smile and a cheerful, "Good morning." She'd immediately go to Ethan, talking to him in that sweet voice, asking about his night, making him giggle. Throughout my 12-hour shifts, she'd send me photos and videos. Ethan sleeping peacefully in his crib, playing with his toys on his activity mat, drinking his bottles with what looked like pure contentment. As a working mom, these updates were everything to me. During my brief breaks between patients, I'd check my phone and see these adorable snapshots of my baby having a wonderful day. Rebecca seemed punctual, organized, and professional. She'd clean up after herself, do Ethan's laundry without being asked, and even prep his bottles for the next day. When I'd come home exhausted after a long shift, she'd give me detailed reports about his day, how much he'd eaten, how long he'd napped, what new sounds he'd made. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect, as I'd later realize. But around the 3rd week, specifically, it was September 28th, I remember the date exactly because I wrote it down later. I started noticing something that made my nursing instincts prickle with unease. Every Tuesday and Thursday, which were my longest shifts running from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., Ethan would be in this strange state when I came home. It wasn't normal baby tiredness. I'd seen thousands of tired babies in my career. This was different. Ethan would be deeply sedated, almost completely unresponsive. His little body would be completely limp when I picked him up, like a rag doll. His breathing seemed slower and more labored than normal. His muscle tone was loose in a way that reminded me of patients who'd been given sedatives. When I'd try to wake him for his nighttime feeding, it would take several minutes of gentle shaking and talking before he'd even open his eyes. Even then, his pupils looked different, smaller than they should be, and his gaze seemed unfocused, almost glassy. His reflexes were sluggish. When I'd touch his palm, instead of his normal strong grip reflex, his fingers would barely close around mine. The first time it happened, I mentioned my concerns to Rebecca as she was gathering her things to leave. Her response was immediate and seemed reasonable. "Oh, he had such a rough day today, poor little guy. He was extra fussy. Probably a growth spurt. You know how they get. He exhausted himself crying and then just crashed hard around 3 p.m. I have videos from earlier if you want to see how cranky he was." She showed me her phone, and there were indeed videos of Ethan fussing earlier in the day, crying in his bouncy seat, arching his back in that way babies do when they're overtired. It looked completely normal, and her explanation made perfect sense. Babies do go through growth spurts. They do get extra fussy. They do crash after crying for extended periods. But my nursing instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The second Tuesday it happened, I paid closer attention. When I walked in the door at 8:15 p.m., Rebecca was sitting on my couch, scrolling through her phone, looking completely relaxed. She greeted me with her usual warm smile and said, "He's been sleeping like an angel for hours. Such a good baby today. Barely made a peep after his 2 p.m. bottle." I went to check on Ethan immediately. He was lying in his crib in the exact same position I'd imagined Rebecca had placed him hours earlier. When I gently touched his forehead, he didn't stir at all. His skin felt normal temperature-wise, but there was something about the quality of his sleep that felt wrong. It was too deep, too still. I quietly took his vital signs using the pulse oximeter I kept in his room, a habit from my NICU days. His heart rate was 78 beats per minute. Normal for a 6-month-old is between 110 and 160. His oxygen saturation was 96%, which is acceptable but on the lower end. These numbers set off every alarm bell in my medical training. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking on Ethan every hour, documenting his vital signs, watching his breathing patterns. Around 2 a.m., he finally started stirring normally, and by his 6 a.m. feeding, he seemed back to his usual alert, interactive self. But the whole episode felt wrong in a way I couldn't shake. I started thinking about a case we'd had at the hospital just 6 months earlier. A 9-month-old had been brought in by his babysitter, supposedly found unconscious after what should have been a normal afternoon nap. The babysitter claimed she'd found him unresponsive in his crib and immediately called 911. But when we ran the toxicology panel, the baby's blood showed dangerous levels of diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl. The babysitter insisted it was an accident, claiming she'd given him just a tiny bit to help with allergies. But the levels in his system were consistent with an adult dose, enough to cause respiratory depression. Child Protective Services got involved, and eventually the babysitter admitted she'd been giving him medication to make him sleep because he was such a difficult baby. The child survived, but barely. The babysitter was convicted of child endangerment. The similarities between that case and what I was seeing with Ethan were terrifying. I decided to start paying much closer attention to the patterns. I created a detailed log, noting every shift Rebecca worked, Ethan's behavior when I left versus when I returned, his vital signs, his alertness levels. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Every single Tuesday and Thursday, the days Rebecca worked her longest shifts with him, the same thing happened. She'd text me around 2 p.m. saying Ethan was having a rough day and was finally settling down for a long nap. Then I'd come home to find him in that deeply sedated state. But here's what really convinced me something sinister was happening. On the days Rebecca wasn't there, when my mother-in-law watched Ethan, or when I had shorter shifts and was home earlier, he was completely normal, alert, active, his usual grabby, curious, energetic self. The difference was so dramatic it couldn't possibly be coincidental. My mother-in-law, Janet, even commented on it one Thursday evening when she'd watched him. "I don't know what Rebecca's been telling you about him being fussy," she said, "but this little guy has been an absolute angel all day. Hardly cried at all, ate like a champ, played happily, easiest baby I've ever watched." The contrast was stark and undeniable. You guys are probably thinking I should have confronted Rebecca immediately, called the police, or at least talked to my pediatrician. But I knew how serious my suspicions were. As a medical professional, I understood that accusing someone of drugging a baby isn't something you do lightly. Without concrete proof, it would be my word against hers, and she had those glowing references from previous families. I needed evidence that would hold up legally and protect other children from potential harm. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I was going to install hidden surveillance cameras throughout my house and document whatever was happening during those Tuesday and Thursday shifts. I spent an entire weekend researching surveillance systems, reading reviews, watching YouTube tutorials about hidden camera placement. I wanted something that would capture everything without being obvious. I ended up ordering 6 wireless cameras from Amazon, tiny devices that looked like everyday household items. One was disguised as a phone charger, another as a small picture frame, one that looked like a smoke detector, and even one that appeared to be a decorative clock. I set them up strategically throughout every room Rebecca had access to: the nursery, the kitchen, the living room, the hallway, and yes, even my master bedroom where I kept my medications in the bathroom medicine cabinet. Each camera had motion activation and could stream live to my phone, plus store footage on a cloud server. The installation process was nerve-wracking. I had to make sure everything looked completely natural, while ensuring I had coverage of every angle where something suspicious might happen. The camera in the nursery was positioned to capture both Ethan's crib and the rocking chair where Rebecca usually fed him. The kitchen camera had a clear view of the counter where she prepared his bottles. The waiting period was absolute torture. For the next week, I had to act completely normal around Rebecca, while these cameras recorded everything that happened in my house. Every morning when I left for work, my heart pounded, knowing that if my suspicions were correct, I was leaving my baby with someone who was intentionally harming him. But I also knew that if I was wrong, if Rebecca was innocent, the cameras would prove that too, and I could stop living in this nightmare of suspicion and paranoia. The first few days of footage showed nothing unusual. Rebecca going about her normal routine, caring for Ethan, playing with him, feeding him regular bottles. I started to wonder if maybe I was being paranoid. If perhaps there was some other medical explanation for Ethan's Tuesday and Thursday lethargy. But then came Tuesday, October 15th, a date that's burned into my memory forever. I was at the hospital, reviewing the previous day's camera footage on my phone during my lunch break in the staff cafeteria. Everything seemed normal until I got to the 1:47 p.m. timestamp. That's when I watched Rebecca walk into my master bedroom, straight to my bathroom, and open my medicine cabinet. My hands started shaking as I watched her examine the various medication bottles I kept there. My birth control pills, some leftover antibiotics, a bottle of Tylenol PM, And yes, a prescription bottle of Ativan that I'd been given months earlier for anxiety related to returning to work after maternity leave. She picked up the Ativan bottle, shook it slightly as if checking how many pills were inside, then opened it and shook 2 small white pills into her palm. She closed the bottle, put it back exactly where it had been, and walked back to the kitchen with the pills concealed in her hand. I had to excuse myself from the cafeteria and find a private place to continue watching, because what happened next made me physically nauseous. In the kitchen, Rebecca placed the 2 pills on the counter and used the back of a spoon to crush them into powder. She was methodical about it, making sure they were completely pulverized. Then she took one of Ethan's prepared bottles from the refrigerator and mixed the crushed medication directly into his formula. My hands were literally shaking so violently, I could barely hold my phone as I watched her swirl the bottle to distribute the medication throughout the formula. But guys, that's not even the most disturbing part of what I witnessed. What happened next made me realize this wasn't just negligence or poor judgment. This was calculated, deliberate abuse. At 2:03 p.m., Rebecca carried the drugged bottle into the nursery where Ethan was playing in his crib, babbling and reaching for his toys. She picked him up with what appeared to be genuine affection, settled into the rocking chair, and began feeding him the bottle. But here's the sick part that still haunts me. She pulled out her phone and started recording him drinking it. She actually filmed my baby consuming the medication that she knew would sedate him. The footage showed her zooming in on his face as he sucked down the bottle, and I could see her expression in the reflection of the nursery mirror. It wasn't the loving, concerned look of a caregiver. It was satisfaction. Pure, disturbing satisfaction watching him drink what she knew would render him unconscious. Within 20 minutes, I watched Ethan's movements become sluggish through the camera feed. His usual energetic arm waving slowed, then stopped. His eyes became heavy, then closed completely. By 2:30 p.m., he was completely unconscious in his crib, and Rebecca was back on my couch, scrolling through her phone, ordering things online, completely ignoring my sedated baby for the next 4 hours. When I got home that night, she gave me her usual cheerful report. He was a little fussy after lunch, but he's been sleeping peacefully for hours now. Poor little guy must have worn himself out. He's such a good sleeper. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and scream, to demand she explain what she'd done to my baby. But I knew I needed more evidence. What if this was somehow a one-time incident? What if she'd made some kind of mistake with dosage? I had to be absolutely certain this was intentional and repeated before I involved law enforcement. The next Thursday's footage destroyed any remaining doubt I had about Rebecca's intentions. This time, she was even more methodical and calculated in her approach. At 1:15 p.m., I watched her return to my medicine cabinet and take out 3 Ativan pills, a full adult dose that could have stopped Ethan's breathing permanently. But before preparing them, she did something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. She tested a small amount of the crushed medication mixture on her finger and tasted it, making sure it wasn't too bitter and would blend well with the formula. She actually cared more about masking the taste of the drugs than she did about the potentially lethal dose she was preparing for my 6-month-old baby. But then she did something that proved beyond any doubt that this was all premeditated and calculated. Instead of using prepared formula, she went to my refrigerator and took out the breast milk I'd pumped the night before. My own breast milk that I'd produced to nourish and protect my son was being used as a vehicle to poison him. The symbolism of that violation felt like a knife in my heart. This wasn't just child abuse. This was a perversion of the most fundamental bond between mother and child. At 1:33 p.m., she carried Ethan and the drugged breast milk to the nursery, settled into the rocking chair, and began feeding him while singing lullabies. The cameras picked up audio, and she was literally singing "Go to Sleep, Little Baby," while administering medication that could have killed him. The juxtaposition of her gentle voice singing a loving lullaby while knowingly poisoning an infant was the most disturbing thing I'd ever witnessed in my life. But guys, the evidence I discovered next revealed that this wasn't just about convenience or laziness. This was something much darker and more sinister than I could have imagined. While reviewing more footage, I noticed Rebecca frequently using my laptop when she thought Ethan was sleeping. Initially, I assumed she was just checking email or social media, but when I examined my browser history later, what I found made me realize I was dealing with someone truly dangerous. In a folder she'd created called Sleepy Baby, I discovered dozens of photos and videos of Ethan in various states of drug-induced unconsciousness. Some were artistic-style photos with him posed in his crib like he was peacefully sleeping. Others showed him completely limp and unresponsive, while she arranged his limbs in different positions. The metadata on these photos revealed she'd been doing this since her second week of employment. Second week. This wasn't a recent development or a gradual escalation. She'd been systematically drugging my baby for over 2 months, documenting it like some kind of sick experiment. When I realized the full scope and duration of what had been happening to my child, I had to step outside the hospital and vomit in the parking lot. My colleagues found me crying hysterically, and I had to tell them that my baby had been poisoned repeatedly for months by someone I'd trusted completely with his life. The final piece of evidence I discovered was what convinced me that Rebecca was truly dangerous and needed to be stopped before she hurt another child. Her browser history on my laptop revealed searches that chilled me to the bone. How much Benadryl to give baby? Signs of medication overdose in infants. What happens if baby takes too much melatonin? And most disturbing, do babies remember being hurt when they're older? She wasn't accidentally overdosing him or making mistakes with dosage. She was systematically researching how much medication she could give without killing him. But the evidence that absolutely convinced me she knew exactly what she was doing came from online forums she'd joined where nannies and babysitters complained about difficult children. In one post from a forum called Nanny Support Network, she'd written, "Some babies just need a little help settling down for longer naps. A tiny amount of adult sleep medication works wonders, and parents never know the difference. Just make sure you don't use too much. You want them sleepy, not dead. Works every time." She had written that. My nanny had posted advice online about how to drug babies without killing them, sharing her technique with other childcare providers. That was the moment I knew I was dealing with a predator who had likely been abusing children for years and was teaching others to do the same. That Thursday night, I meticulously made copies of everything. Every video file, every photo, every browser search, every forum post, every piece of digital evidence. I organized it all chronologically and burned multiple copies to DVDs. Then I called the police, Child Protective Services, and arranged for Ethan to have emergency blood and hair testing with a pediatric toxicologist. Friday morning, I called Rebecca and told her I was feeling sick with the stomach bug and would be staying home from work. The plan was for police to arrive while she was in the house, so she couldn't destroy any evidence or flee. I set up the cameras to live stream directly to my phone so I could monitor everything from my bedroom while pretending to be ill. At exactly 9:15 a.m., Detective Maria Martinez and Officer David Johnson arrived at my front door with an arrest warrant. I watched through the camera feed as Rebecca answered the door, and her face went completely white when they showed their badges. The first words out of her mouth were, "I don't know what Sarah told you, but I've never hurt that baby. Whatever she thinks she saw, she's wrong." Nobody had told her yet what this visit was about, or what allegations had been made. They arrested her right there in my living room while Ethan sat in his high chair, eating normal, unmedicated baby food for probably the first time in months. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son was more alert, interactive, and engaged during her arrest than he'd been during any of her previous visits. The search of Rebecca's belongings revealed even more incriminating evidence. In her purse, they found 3 different types of medication that didn't belong to her: Ativan tablets, children's Benadryl, and melatonin supplements. In her car, they discovered a composition notebook where she'd been meticulously tracking dosages and effects for different children across multiple families. My Ethan was listed as Subject E, with detailed notes about his weight, his reactions to various amounts of medication, and which drugs worked best for achieving extended sleep periods. The clinical, detached way she documented abusing my child was terrifying. But guys, the most disturbing discovery was a collection of photos on her personal phone, not just of Ethan, but of at least 6 other babies and toddlers in similar sedated states, all taken in different homes with different furniture and toys. The police immediately contacted her former employers, and 2 other families confirmed they'd noticed their children being unusually drowsy and lethargic after Rebecca's shifts. We weren't her only victims. She'd been systematically drugging children for years. The toxicology results came back 3 days later, confirming dangerous levels of diphenhydramine, lorazepam, and melatonin in Ethan's system. Dr. Patricia Wexler, the pediatric toxicologist who reviewed his case, told me that if Rebecca had continued or increased the dosages, it could have caused respiratory failure, coma, or death. My baby had been 1 medication dose away from dying. 3 weeks later, Rebecca Martinez was formally charged with 6 counts of reckless endangerment, 3 counts of administering poison to a minor, 2 counts of child abuse, and 1 count of attempted murder. The attempted murder charge came specifically from the Thursday incident where she'd given Ethan the triple dose of Ativan. The prosecutor argued that anyone with her experience had to know that amount could be fatal to an infant. During the investigation, police discovered she'd been using this method for years across multiple families. She specifically sought out positions with working parents who had long, demanding schedules, giving her hours of unsupervised access to children. When questioned, she told investigators she started drugging children because some babies are just too demanding and exhausting, and it was much easier than dealing with crying and fussiness all day. She showed no remorse, no understanding of the magnitude of harm she'd caused. Her primary concern seemed to be whether she'd still be able to work with children after this misunderstanding was resolved. The trial lasted 6 months and was one of the most emotionally devastating experiences of my life. I had to testify for 4 hours, describing in detail how I'd discovered the abuse, walking the jury through each piece of evidence, watching those surveillance videos again in a packed courtroom, seeing footage of Rebecca methodically crushing pills and mixing them into my baby's food while 12 strangers took notes, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But knowing that my evidence was putting away someone who had systematically abused multiple children made every difficult moment worth it. The prosecution presented testimony from 7 other families whose children had been in Rebecca's care. Parents described similar patterns: unusual drowsiness, lethargy, changes in behavior that they'd attributed to normal childhood phases or growth spurts. One mother, Jennifer Walsh, broke down crying as she testified that she'd actually praised Rebecca for being so good at getting her daughter to nap, never realizing her child was being drugged into unconsciousness. Rebecca was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 12 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 8 years. Judge Patricia Chen said her actions showed a callous disregard for the lives and safety of the most vulnerable members of our society, and that her systematic abuse of trust and endangerment of multiple children warranted the maximum sentence allowed by law. But the criminal justice system wasn't finished with her. The families of the other affected children filed civil lawsuits, and Rebecca was ordered to pay over $2.3 million in damages for medical expenses, therapy costs, lost wages from parents who had to take time off work, and compensation for emotional trauma suffered by both children and families. Her house, her car, her savings account, even her retirement fund. Everything she owned was liquidated to pay the families whose children she'd systematically poisoned. Today, 8 months after Rebecca's arrest, Ethan is a healthy, thriving 13-month-old toddler. He's walking, babbling constantly, getting into everything with the boundless energy of a normal child his age. He shows no apparent lasting effects from the months of medication abuse, though he does see a pediatric psychologist twice a month to monitor for any developmental delays or behavioral issues. Dr. Sarah Kim, his psychologist, says we caught the abuse early enough that there shouldn't be permanent cognitive damage, but will continue monitoring his development closely for the next several years. As for me, this experience has completely changed my perspective on trust, childcare, and parent advocacy. I've become a vocal advocate for mandatory background checks, hidden monitoring systems, and better training for parents to recognize signs of childcare abuse. I work with a nonprofit organization called Safe Kids Coalition, helping other parents understand warning signs and navigate the process of reporting suspected abuse. I've consulted on proposed legislation requiring deeper criminal background checks and psychological evaluations for anyone working professionally with children. But honestly, the experience has fundamentally changed how I view trust in general. I learned that someone can have perfect references, proper certifications, appropriate training, and seem completely loving and professional while systematically harming your child behind closed doors. The person who smiles warmly at you every morning, sends you adorable photos throughout the day, and gives you detailed reports about your child's activities might be documenting their systematic abuse of your baby. If there's one crucial message I want every parent to take from my story, it's this: trust your instincts above everything else. If something feels wrong, investigate thoroughly. Don't worry about seeming paranoid, overprotective, or distrustful. Don't let someone else's reassurances override your parental intuition. The worst thing that happens if you're wrong is you waste money on surveillance equipment and owe someone an apology. The worst thing that happens if you're right and do nothing is you lose your child forever. And if you're a parent considering installing hidden cameras in your home, do it without hesitation. They're inexpensive, easy to install, and they might literally save your child's life. Rebecca thought she was being careful, covering her tracks, maintaining plausible deniability. She never imagined that a pediatric nurse would recognize the clinical signs of medication abuse and have the medical knowledge necessary to prove it definitively. The most satisfying moment of this entire ordeal came during the sentencing hearing, when Judge Chen read a victim impact statement from Amanda Henderson, one of Rebecca's previous employers. She said, "Rebecca seemed like the perfect nanny. She was so effective at getting our son to sleep that we enthusiastically recommended her to friends and posted glowing reviews online. Now I realize we were unknowingly helping a predator gain access to more victims. Sarah's investigation didn't just save her son. It saved potentially dozens of other children from abuse we were too blind to see. Every single day when I watch Ethan playing, laughing, exploring his world with boundless curiosity and energy, I'm reminded that those surveillance cameras didn't just catch a crime in progress. They literally saved my baby's life. And knowing that Rebecca Martinez will spend the next 12 years in prison instead of drugging other people's children gives me the kind of satisfaction that every parent dreams of when someone hurts their baby. The other families affected by Rebecca's abuse have become close friends. We meet monthly for support group sessions, and our children play together while we share strategies for healing and moving forward. Seeing all these healthy, thriving kids who could have been seriously harmed or killed by one person's callous disregard for their safety reminds me daily that speaking up and fighting for justice was absolutely the right choice. So tell me honestly, If you had noticed the warning signs I described, would you have installed surveillance cameras? Or would you have confronted the caregiver directly and hoped for an honest explanation? Because I'll tell you right now, if I hadn't had that medical background to recognize the signs of sedation, I might have accepted Rebecca's explanations and never discovered what was really happening. Leave me a comment about what you would have done in my situation, and please share this story with other parents. These warning signs, unusual lethargy, changes in sleeping patterns, behavioral differences on specific days, need to be widely known so other families can protect their children from predators like Rebecca Martinez.